Aside from conducting a needs analysis to determine whether or not there is a gap in performance, the next most important thing that should come out in terms of assessment or analysis is what the relevant learner characteristics are. And we've talked a little bit about the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. Pedagogy refers to educating younger people, perhaps even children, all the way up through traditional undergrad age groups to maybe 21, 22 years of age. And then we float over into the andragogy line of thinking, where learners come to the table with a different set of needs, a different set of frames of reference, and also different motivations for learning. So understanding these things up front can be a very powerful thing in terms of affecting the instructional design. When we assess relevant learner characteristics, we know, of course, that learners are not all alike. I could survey the 21 of you within this course and cite probably 5 different characteristics that each of you brings to the table. Probably a 1 or 2 would be common, simply because of your chronological age and also the fact that most of you are non-traditional students. So as non-traditional students, I am a non-traditional student as well, come to the table with completely different ideas about how important our work is, how to get our work done, and at the end of the day, how to structure our time and parcel out the fulfilling of the rest of the needs within the scope of what we have to manage. It also makes us realize as instructional designers that members of different occupations and individuals differ in the way they like to learn best. And again, you are a perfect example of a stratification of a student population as a sample within the Bowling Green student population as a whole. To realize that as instruction is prepared, these differences have to be taken into account, again, is a very powerful thing. And in order to do that successfully, instructional designers have to be aware of these characteristics of their targeted learners by looking at what the process means to them. And the process of identifying these specific characteristics is called assessing the relevant characteristics of learners, although we will just simply call it learner assessment for ease of use. So before you prepare any instructional design or training materials, you have to understand who is the intended and appropriate learner. And if you have a span of learner types and learner backgrounds, demographics, you need to really consider that in the production and assembly of your materials. And the answer to the question helps define the target population, the target group, and the target audience. Any of those individual things could be determined among themselves, but to look at them all in conjunction one with another is probably the best case scenario. So traditionally, authors on the subject of relevant learner characteristics have advised instructional designers to direct their attention to typical or representative learners so as to maximize the number and success rates of people who subsequently participate in the instruction. However, we're seeing a trend toward the growing sensitivity to the needs of the atypical learner, such as those possessing physical, mental, or learning disabilities, and this may require instructional designers to pay increasing attention to a broader range of learner characteristics. Also important in instructional design in this way is to determine what languages and cultural characteristics will be necessary to target the audience and convey to them the information that you would like to convey. Categories of learner characteristics fall into 3 broad characteristic categories: situation-related, decision-related, and learner-related. And I'll go through each one of those. In situation-related, we see that somebody is required to learn something for perhaps their work environment. And it may be something that's more of an overview or broad-based concept for them, and it's not necessarily tied into their day-to-day duties every single day, but it is something that they should have an understanding of. For example, regulatory matters. If somebody is working with HIPAA compliance, they need to understand the broad brush of HIPAA and what the implications are for their particular business, and of course then on a micro level what those implications mean to them as workers. Decision-related characteristics is another category, and this gives the impression that the individual, the worker, has options as to how they will actually do their job. If one condition exists, they could choose option A. If another condition exists, they could choose B, and then, of course, going on down the line, depending upon how many choices they actually need to carry out their work, there may be 4 or 5 different types of choices related to those decision trees that they would employ on a regular basis. Obviously, the complexity is positively correlated with the number of decision-related characteristics. That is to say that the higher number of decision choices that an employee has to make, the higher the complexity of the job itself is going to be. And then finally, there are learner-related characteristics. And when we talk about learner-related characteristics, we talk about the type of person who is performing the type of job. For instance, is this a production environment where the piece of the puzzle that the person working with a specific leg of production has is very small, and as such, should their skill set be considered when we're designing instruction for that person? In other words, you could easily get into a situation where overkill is part of the training experience, and of course, this again goes back to some of the negatives about training that we've experienced as well as heard about and read about. It has to be directly applicable to what they're doing on the job, otherwise it can be perceived as a waste of their time. So when should we assess learner characteristics? Well, there are probably 3 very good times to assess. Of course, before instruction is prepared, instructional needs and specific human performance problems have to be assessed as they exist at the present time. Remember, we're always looking for the gap. Where is the gap? Where are we now, and where should we be? Well, the difference between here and there is our gap, and that is what the instructional design and training, subsequent training, is supposed to fulfill. A second option may be when we are looking at learners who may need to participate in future instruction, perhaps on a regular basis. We have to make sure that they are equipped to learn what it is that we want to have them walk away with in terms of skill sets. And if they need back knowledge or remedial knowledge or some sort of frame of reference that they don't already have, then it's up to the instructional designer to recognize that and incorporate that either on an individual basis or on a group level, depending upon the work situation. Finally, learner characteristics should be assessed each time instruction is delivered. And this is to say that time changes, people change, there's a maturation process involved. When somebody's been on a job for a length of time, they have more of a sophisticated view of the instruction that's going to be delivered than, say, someone who just started in the job a couple of months ago and who may have minimal experience in the field. So every time the instruction is delivered, that survey should be done by not only the instructional designer, but also the persons who are responsible for delivering the training and then following up and thusly supporting the training as it's transferred back into the work environment.